watching Business Access TV.
Business Access TV.
Business Access.
Business Access TV.
Serious about business.
Hello and welcome to Business Access Television's coverage of the official launch of the Caribbean Alternative Investment Association, Caraia. Now, Caraia is a non-profit organization which aims to expand access to private equity and other alternative investment instruments. We're at the Jamaica Pegasus Hotel in Kingston. I'm your host, Keneal Gale.
Indeed, my great pleasure as the Managing Director of the Development Bank of Jamaica to welcome you all to this event, the official launch of the Caribbean Alternative Investment Association, otherwise known as Caraia. And Audrey, I hope I got that right. Allow me to welcome Mr. Paul B. Scott, Chairman of the Board of the DBJ, and this evening, our keynote speaker, Mr. Joseph Matalan, former chairman of the DBJ and a founding member of Caraia. I want to thank you all for graciously agreeing to be with us here this afternoon. This afternoon event is indeed the fulfillment of a commitment made some 4 years ago under the agreement signed with the IDB Lab, back then it was the Inter-America Development Bank, to establish a vibrant equity and venture capital industry in Jamaica. One of the many deliverables under that agreement was a private sector-led association under the leadership of Audrey Richards, the head of the venture capital program at the DBJ. I think we can truly say this afternoon, promise stroke commitment made, promise stroke commitment kept. And so it is an honor for the DBJ to be hosting this groundbreaking event as we officially launch this association. This authority, this association, is the first of its kind in this region that covers the full spectrum of alternative investment assets class, that is private equity, venture capital, real estate, private capital, and mezzanine financing. And in that regard, we are extraordinarily pleased. And this is good for Jamaica and the wider Caribbean when taken against the background that globally the Caribbean is being considered as a bloc. It therefore means that the association will become the voice that speaks collectively on behalf of its members, thereby placing the Caribbean more effectively on the world's alternative investment stage. I am sure you will agree with me that this is indicative of solid and strategic long-term focus and vision. And so I would like to extend my personal congratulations, thanks and appreciation on behalf of the DBJ to the Advisory Council of Caraia, a small group of visionaries comprising Chris Williams, Joe Matalan, Nicholas Scott, Jason Morris, Keith Collister, Brian Fraser, Stephen Gooden, and of course, our Audrey Richards. Over the last 9 months, these investors have been deliberating and strategizing on the best model for the association. Many ideations, pivots, surveys, and reworks have taken place to arrive at the right model. Your strong support is a signal that the work of the DBJ, and indeed the Jamaica Venture Capital Program, is on the right trajectory.
Well, the launching of Caraia, and that's how we're going to pronounce it maybe. I'm sure there'll be lots of iterations. But it represents for us a significant milestone as it has been one of the deliverables. As Mr. Reynolds indicated, it's one of the deliverables of our VC program. And of course, we at DBG are very, very pleased at hosting this event as we pass the baton to the private sector. Now, having been members of international private capital associations, it's always a little disconcerting when you attend these events and you get everybody else on the map, and then the Caribbean is a little dot with a few people that fly over, but you hear LAFCO, you hear about Brazil and Mexico and Colombia and all the other countries, but the Caribbean is not on the map. And we're a little jealous of that because we believe that we're important. So we think that we need to make the world know that things are happening in the Caribbean and that more and more will be happening. We believe that we have a story that we're going to be able to tell. But I'm just going to spend a few minutes sharing with you how we come to be there. Through the JV Capital project, we set out to develop basically an ecosystem. It was an ecosystem building mission, initially just to provide equity capital, access to equity for high potential SMEs. Now, in undertaking this, one of the things that we're always very clear about from the beginning, that this was going to be a private sector-led industry, and that we at DBJ were merely there as a catalyst and as some early anchor investor in funds. It would have been easy for the government of Jamaica in the early 2012-13 to have decided that they needed to set up a big $1 billion fund, and for that fund to start investing, government start investing in SMEs. But that was never the route that we chose to take, because we learned a lot of lessons. We got a lot of lessons learned out of IDB and other countries, their experience in this arena. And being able, just for the governments to be trying to deploy private capital in what is a private capital industry, it doesn't usually end up in a good story. So we had to look to see how we could build the ecosystem. And when we looked around, we recognized that there were so many gaps in our ecosystem to start off with. We're building a market, and like any other market, whether or not you're banking, your securities market, or your coronation market, you need the buyers, you need the sellers, you need some kind of infrastructure. And when we did that first market review, there were significant gaps in the ecosystem. There was knowledge gaps. Most of our players had been used to doing a lot of government paper, private, a few listed equities, but private equity was, I kept on being asked all the time, when is the joint venture program being set up? And I was at pains to explain that this was venture capital, not joint venture. And interestingly enough, I don't think I've been asked that in the last year and a half, 2 years. So there was an information gap. There was no information on who is doing what, were there any deals or anything. And there was a major legal regulatory gap. And of course, we know that the pension regulations are now being modified or have now been modified, but there's still a lot of work to be done. There was an entrepreneurship gap that was highlighted. The lack of readiness by entrepreneurs. If they are supposed to be receiving capital, it's not the same game as when they go to a bank to be able to access that funding. So there was a lot of work that needed to be done in there. Looking at the ecosystem, the fundamental conditions to develop the market were really missing. As I mentioned, the legal regulatory system, the efficiency of liquidity mechanisms, as well as the availability of highly qualified professionals such as fund managers. Now, the market responds to macroeconomic conditions, and thankfully this was beginning to go in the right direction. So all stars were beginning to align. And the existence, of course, of the stock exchange junior market was a plus, as it also created an exit mechanism. So the JV Capital program started with a lot of training, capacity building, and over the last few years we have trained over 800 stakeholders, investors, fund managers, attorneys, and so on in understanding what the asset class is about. We have trained just under 400 investors in becoming ready to access equity finance. We impacted over 2,000 university students receiving business model training and having the tools to be able to build their businesses. And we have had 6 international conferences, of which we're very proud, because we've been able to bring in international players, regional players, as well as our local players in the venture capital space, infrastructure space, private equity space. Importantly, for the Caribbean to be taken seriously, one of the things we do need to have is data, lots of data, that persons looking inwards can understand what's happening on the ground. So the Caraia is going to have a big job of developing its own database platform, collecting that data and being able to pretty much disseminate the data. We haven't done it alone. We have had the support from our international partners, particularly IDB. For the JV Capital project, we've had a lot of support from the market stakeholders, for steering committee, and our oversight committee. And last but not least, I want to thank and congratulate my private sector colleagues for the establishment of Caraia and to their obvious commitment to the development of the capital markets in Jamaica and the Caribbean. We, of course, look forward to the region recognized in the global community as a very highly respected investment and entrepreneurship hub, and that is our goal. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
We take our first break from BATV's coverage of the official launch of the Caribbean Alternative Investment Association, happening here at the Jamaica Pegasus. More when we return. Thanks for staying with us for the official launch of the Caribbean Alternative Investment Association. Here to give remarks on behalf of the IDB Lab is Terry and Sigrid Brown.
It is with great pride from a personal perspective as well as a IDB perspective that I am here to celebrate with a DBJ in this regard. So let's start on a personal perspective. I've been with this program for a while, and I know we have been working towards this initiative from 2016, and there are others, Audrey, who have been working on this before. And it is indeed a great privilege to see that we are here now at this point where we have all the major stakeholders in this room gathered to launch this event and to launch this association. IDB is very pleased in this venture because we have funded a program, and I've been a partner with DBJ for many years. IDB is all about inclusion in the region, improving lives. So under IDB Lab, which is the entity that provided the funding, we're all about innovation for inclusion, working with the private sector, with government entities, and with NGOs towards building an ecosystem. And I've seen where DBJ has now taken that even another step further. And I've not just been looking at Jamaica, but how can this be rolled out across the Caribbean region? How do we then take the lessons we have learned in Jamaica and make it applicable to other countries in the Caribbean? So tonight, I'm very happy again, very pleased to be at the launch of this association. I've seen so many of the members that have come on. I think you have made strides, and I look forward to additional members joining. But I still think that we have some work to do in sensitizing the investors to accept greater risk. And this continues to be a role that the association is going to have to promote these messages across and help with the legal and regulatory environment as you progress.
We have been found. That's what we want to say. We have been found. We're there now. We're there. This is a momentous occasion. This feels like how I felt when Bolt win in Beijing. You understand? It's like history. You understand? It's a different thing. You know, so from Bolt win in Beijing, we know the world changed. when you look at the environment, and I have to speak firstly about Jamaica environment. We name it Caribbean, but we don't reach Caribbean yet. But we're ambitious, right? But we're starting from the base of Jamaica. And when we look at the Jamaican environment, we're comforted by the last 6 years. We're comforted by the reduction in the debt to GDP ratio. We're comforted by the fiscal discipline of both governments. We feel like we're getting somewhere. But when you look at the numbers, we're not getting anywhere. We're not getting the growth. And unless we get the growth, because the ultimate objective, is to move the per capita income. That's the objective. It's not to reduce debt to GDP. It's not to show better fiscal discipline. Those are means to the end. The end is to move income per person. Right? That is the bottom line. So we're searching for that. And what is missing is not access to financing. It's not more loans. The government show you that. It's not more capital market transactions. We've seen that over the last we're top in the world in the last 5 years. So we've seen that the capital market explosion still hasn't resulted in the growth that we want. But ladies and gentlemen, tonight we have been. It is access to alternative financing that is missing. That is what we're missing. And that is what we have found. We have found the missing link. We need people to step up and say, I believe in your idea, even though you don't have no real estate security, even though you don't have no car to give me as collateral, even though you don't have no guarantor from your rich uncle or whatever. But all you have is a brilliant idea, and I'll take the risk with you. That's what Caraia is about. All right, so we're there now. We need some help. We need some help. Brian and the pensions team, we need some help. Keith, we need some help. You can't ask Bolt to go run at the Olympics without a pair of spikes. The reality is we don't have no spikes. You pretty up Security Dealers Association, you pretty up Bankers Association. We need some help on this side of the fence now. We need an allocation from the pension industry. We're going to help you. Pension industry, your yield problem can only be solved if you come down the risk metric and look at progressive managers to help you. So we don't expect you to go out there and go find 100 venture capital opportunities. We don't expect you to do that. What we expect you to do is to look to a fund manager like Epley or like Cygnus, or you really want a good fund manager like Proven. But look to the fund managers. They are the ones out there doing the dirty work. They're knocking on the doors. They're meeting with entrepreneurs. They're having the conversations. They're doing capacity building. That will make your life easier. So your work and your job is solved. You also have been? Okay, found. Big thanks to the founding members. We have a solid platform. Not many associations can kick off with $75,000 in them bank account. So big up to the founding members. You guys have really stepped up to the plate and put up some money and made sure that we have a solid platform to roll out with. So thank you. Give yourselves a round of applause.
We take another break from the official launch of the Caribbean Alternative Investment Association. When we come back, we hear from the keynote speaker. Stay with us. The keynote address for the official launch of the Caribbean Alternative Investment Association comes to you from Chairman of the Development Bank of Jamaica, Mr. Paul B. Scott.
Chris, in his earlier comments, hit the nail on the head. We have, over the last 5 years, and you know, he described this as a Beijing moment, but I have to say that the fiscal discipline that the government has managed over the last 5 years, that has deleveraged effectively the government, in my opinion, is as impressive as Usain Bolt winning gold once. I mean, the reality is that the world has dramatically changed in the last 5 years. And I feel really privileged as a Jamaican and as a business person to be working in this period of time. The 1990s effectively, through poor monetary policy, destroyed an entire generation of entrepreneurs. And, you know, to a large degree, I was very privileged to go and work at Mawson and, you know, become CEO in 2004 at a fairly young age. A lot to do with the fact that I'm a product of lucky sperm opposed to probably ability. But the reality is that when I started to be CEO, there was a generation gap, a massive generation gap in business in Jamaica. Because effectively, the generation of the people who were in their 40s, when I was in my mid-20s, had been wiped out, and then they had left. And it's hard to explain to people what that is actually like. For someone like myself, that has been a tremendous opportunity. It's been a tremendous opportunity for us to be able to invest in a marketplace where you have a lot of energy. The generation running the country for 10 years should have probably been retiring, because their generation that was supposed to be taking over from them effectively had been wiped out, because those that took risk were punished for it. Those that borrowed money and who took risk ended up destroyed by bad policy. The fiscal discipline of the last 5 years has essentially created a different environment, an environment where the capital markets are now real. But it's not enough for just a select few to have access to those capital markets. You know, we don't in Jamaica just want growth. Yes, that's a start. We do want growth. But we need inclusive growth. We need growth where capital formation is fundamental to the development of this country. There's a lot of talk in the last week or so about the dollar moving. And, you know, to a large degree, that's only really relevant because we have a structural problem in our economy in that we're relying so much on imports, and we're not doing as much trading internally than we should be doing. And that is really a function of the fact that our capital formation, the new companies coming up, the level of production is just simply not there, or not growing at the rate that it ought to grow. Now, it is incredibly pleasing that the debt to GDP has fallen by a significant amount. And it's extraordinarily pleasing that we can actually believe that we may well hit our 60% debt to GDP by the targets that we have. And that is very, very pleasing. But the reality is that money that's going to come into the private system has to go and work because we have an open exchange rate here. So if we do not create opportunities for capital to flow to yield and return, it will find return somewhere. And it will end up in New York or London or Hong Kong or elsewhere because money flows to yield. And at the end of the day, we have a lot of work to do in Jamaica with regard to the regulatory frameworks that effectively capture capital. And right now you're seeing a situation where financial institutions, many of the people in this room, are facing reduced returns based upon being forced to put money in certain asset classes. And that is not going to end well. The very regulatory design of essentially determining that, for example, the MCT for general insurance companies should be at 250%, and that 90% of your assets should be in government bonds shorter than 12 months, is leading to, and will continue to lead with the deleveraging of the Jamaican debt, to those very companies that policy is designed to sort of strengthen, becoming significantly weaker because their other income has dropped off a cliff. So we have to look at working through some of these regulatory impediments. And that is why it's so pleasing that the private sector has taken on the mantle of developing Caraia.
When we come back, we'll hear more from keynote speaker Paul B. Scott.
Alternative investing is a really interesting area. And in many ways, the Development Bank of Jamaica is like an alternative investment institution. Our role is to fill market gaps. And it needs to be understood that that is our role. Our role is not to offer the cheapest loans in the marketplace. If there is a deficit of capital for loans, and there was a time when that was the role of the DBJ because there was no capital available through the private system to lend because the government had completely crowded out from bad monetary policy, the DBJ could lend money. The private markets now have plenty capital available to lend. So the DBJ then started to lend longer. So it wasn't so much about the coupon rate and the price, or even access, it was then about, can we lend money and give money at a tenor that the private market won't give? Because that's what they're not doing. So we started to lend at 15 years and developed lending that was flexible, that allowed people to do real estate development for BPO. And it's a good example, because that wasn't available before. That allowed a BPO industry to be built in Jamaica, where today 41,000 people are employed. 41,000 people employed. And to a large degree, our unemployment today, which is just hovering under 8%, a lot of it has to do with initiatives such as that. Today, the DBJ is not alone in offering 15-year money. The vast majority of the market will offer 15-year money and possibly 20-year money. So that is not where the DBJ can add value. I get telephone calls constantly from clients of the DBJ saying, the rate is too high. This is not a concessionary rate. This is higher than NCB or BNS or anybody else. And I have to say to them, well, you know, the market's working, it's starting to work, and go to NCB. Go borrow from NCB. Go borrow from where you can get the best rate. Because it's not the role of the government to be a lending institution. It's the role of the government to work and nurture an ecosystem to allow capital to be delivered for capital formation. And that's what's exciting about the DBJ, because the DBJ has been working on this ecosystem. It's been working on the venture capital program, and Audrey has done an incredible job from the beginning in developing this system. And now that it has been developed, it is incredibly satisfying to see that the private sector is taking on that role, taking on that development, and taking on the role of doing lobbying for further pension reform, for tax laws with regard to partnerships, because for the regulatory changes that need to happen with life insurance companies and general insurance companies, because there is a role for that. And if it's not done in a technical and sophisticated way, then it's not going to get done. You have to be somewhat scientific in how you go about it. You need to read the legislation, go over it, and be very granular on what you want. We can't just we can't just complain. What we need to do is we need to put resources, and that's great that you are funded from the start. And DBJ will, as a member, will continue to support you. But we need to put resources behind identifying and clearly articulating what is required for the private sector to be able to excel in the alternative investment space. Capital is not just about money, it's about people. And in fact, the most important thing in any business or society is people. And people need to have the ability to believe that their dreams can come true in Jamaica. Entrepreneurs are entrepreneurs because they're dreamers and they can conceptualize something. But if they cannot believe that Jamaica can deliver what their aspirations are, they're going to emigrate. I think all the members that have joined Caraia have themselves shown that they are risk takers, they understand the marketplace, and they work very hard to develop or have developed their businesses. But with no offense to any of them, Epley included or Proven, the reality is that there needs to be another 50 alternative investment managers out there. And you should not be threatened by other people in the space, because the Caribbean is a big canvas. It's a big canvas. And you also should realize that you're in the game of raising capital. And for Bolt to be the best in the world, someone has to come second. If he was running by himself, it would be very unimpressive and very boring. So you need other people, their performance, to not be so good in order for the true performers to look good. So don't feel that this is a situation where you're taking from someone else when you're coming in. The market is massive. The canvas is large. An ecosystem is incredibly important for all of you to survive and work. And if you want to have an economy that's growing, you've got to have, yes, capital formation at a low level, growing and becoming bigger. The development of private equity in Jamaica will allow, with maturity and cooperation, you to negotiate and co-bid, bid together in consortiums for assets. It's a real opportunity for you to put together in an organized, formal way enough capital for us to actually change the structure of this economy. Because it's hard, let me tell you. You have a tremendous opportunity to raise capital and purchase significant assets and make them Caribbean owned. And that is so exciting. So at DBJ, we're excited to stand alongside and support all of you as you go out and grow your businesses and raise equity and build out what I would hope is going to be a completely different structural change in our economy going forward.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to tangibly thank our founding members who responded so positively to our call for to become founding members of the association. So it's my honor to announce and present to you the 16 members of the Caribbean Alternative Investment Association.
Audrey says, thank you so much for joining us here on Business Access TV. Congratulations on the launch. Tell me, why was it necessary to have an association?
The association brings together the players in the private equity, venture capital, real estate, private mezzanine funding, and the private credit funding. All these entities that are involved in providing alternative finance. What we wanted to be able to do was to have a common voice, not just in Jamaica, but in the region or to the global audience out there, to say that these entities exist in the Caribbean. They're doing a lot of work in terms of mobilizing capital across the region and investing across the region. Not only does it give a voice to the region, it creates the kind of networks, because we wanted to make it to a real Caribbean association. So although we started in Jamaica with 16 members, we're really looking to take it across the region, because what you find is that if somebody's raising, say, a private equity fund in order to invest in a big infrastructure project, they're not just likely to look at one country in the region. They're likely to look across the region in order to raise that capital to make that investment.
Talk to us a little bit about the evolution of private equity in Jamaica. You know, a lot of people years ago weren't talking about this, and now we're at this point. Just walk us through the evolution.
What the evolution really came about because we looked at what was needed to be able to develop that industry. As I mentioned earlier, you're talking about a market, a private equity market. You're talking about investors who have capital, and you're talking about entrepreneurs and other businesses who need that capital. Now, in order to bring the two together, it's the buyer, the seller, and you need an environment in which it takes place. What we found was that we didn't have the makings of a market. our buyers were not ready, in that the suppliers of capital were not familiar with the asset class. Most of them had invested a lot in government securities, but they were not familiar with investing in private equity. Some of them had invested on the stock exchange in listed equity, but a private equity transaction is different. So we had to do training on that end. For the entrepreneurs, there's still a deficit when it comes to the kind of deal flow that is going to create activity. But our entrepreneurs have come a long way. So we have things like the National Business Model Competition, where entrepreneurs they have an idea, but it's not just good enough to say you have an idea, you want funding. You have to develop your business model, develop your strategy, and be able to convince an investor that you're worth investing in. And of course, when you look across the environment, you need to be able to undertake these transactions. So we set out to do a lot of capacity building on all sides. We've also done things like, as I mentioned, the business model competition, which helps to bring up, the basically how people view things in the environment. And there are some legal and regulatory issues that we've had to address. So it's building block by block. It wasn't an overnight turn on the switch, we're going to do venture capital. It's understanding what are the makings of a market and putting those building blocks in place so that the private sector can now take and move forward and do the transactions. It's not for the government to be doing the transactions. It's the private sector. They now have the tools to go out there and start creating value.
Mr. Matalan, thank you so much for joining us here on Business Access TV. Tell me, how significant is today's launch?
I think it's very significant. I mean, when the venture capital program started in around 2014, this was one of the objectives that we set, the establishment of this private sector-led association that is going to lead the private equity and alternative investment industry in Jamaica. So to see that come to fruition is very, very satisfying. I think it's also significant for the country because it signals, yet another piece of evidence about the maturity of our capital markets and our entrepreneurial ecosystem, all of which I think bodes well for the future of the country.
We had a launch today with a lot of members. What would you say to other potential members who are not yet on board? How do you sell it to them to get them on board?
Well, don't miss out, right? We have, as Mr. Williams has said, been found. This industry is where the yield is, and capital flows to the yield, as Mr. Scott indicated in his presentation. So if you're not there, you're not saying anything, so you need to get on board.
A new day has dawned in the private equity system in Jamaica. What's your feeling right now?
Feeling good, feeling good. The reality is that as a country, we have evolved over the last 5 to 6 years. We have seen some amount of fiscal stability. We have seen tremendous fiscal discipline by our government. And we've seen an evolution of the financial markets ecosystem. We need to understand as Jamaicans that the financial market does not equal the commercial banking market. It's wider than that. We've begun to see some amount of acceptance of that through the equity market. A lot of people are now participating in the equity market, and we want a lot more.
Launching in Jamaica, you already have a foothold. How do you pitch this to the region? How do we make this truly Caribbean?
That's a great question. It's going to be a challenge because we're launching in Jamaica with, primarily Jamaican founding members. But we think that the Caribbean will understand that that was just for efficiency. we think that the Caribbean, specifically the Dominican Republic and Trinidad, are just as aggressive as it relates to the expansion of their ecosystem. And we think that as a result, they will welcome us and we'll get some membership from them. And then we'll also get some directors from them, and we'll therefore widen the thought process. So it's going to take some work. It's going to take some traveling and some knocking on doors and some convincing. But we're going to get there, and it's a historic day. It's a launch of an association that 20 years from now we're going to be very happy with.
And that's where we end our coverage here at the Jamaica Pegasus Hotel in Kingston. You were watching the official launch of the Caribbean Alternative Investment Association. A new day has dawned for the private equity market in Jamaica. I've been your host, Keneal Gale. Keep watching Business Access Television, serious about business.